Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And this week we're going to do a full review of Wuthering Waves. Just to start out, what would you say your first impressions of the game were, David?
Yeah, so we had our video last week. We did a Let's Play experience with both of our first couple hours with Wuthering Waves. So we have that video out, so you can go check that out, experience it quote unquote live as we experienced it for the first time. But in terms of our first impressions, and just to quickly give some backdrop, we didn't participate in any of the closed beta testing. So literally when the game went live on Wednesday night, we dove in and it was our first hands-on experience. I think, see, maybe we'd both, and you can correct me if I'm wrong for your experience. We both seen some gameplay and
Hmm.
had an idea of kind of what to expect, but for the most part, we were going in blind. And so for my first impressions, the first thing that kind of stood out to me was the combat. That even in kind of the tutorials, the hand holding section of the prologue, as it were, I could tell the combat was going to be pretty fluid and pretty good. And Kuro games, historically with Punishing Gray Raven, very stylish and well thought out combat, but introducing things like the perfect dodge and counter attack type gimmicks add another layer to the combat in terms of that. And obviously, there's the notion and the feeling to compare to Genshin because they are in a similar space. So I would say it adds a little bit of a layer to that Genshin maybe doesn't have, but I think we lose out on not having elemental reactions. So that's maybe something that Genshin, that's their layer that they add that Wuthering Waves does not. But the combat was pretty fluid, very stylish, as I expected it to be. I also appreciated that running, you could run forever. There's no stamina bar that drains because you're running. You only have your stamina bar as it relates to dodging. So that's kind of nice. And the fact that running up walls isn't a trek like it could be in Genshin or other games. You can literally wall run up as much as your stamina would allow, and in that regard, stamina would drain. Character design, it's I think you got a good expression for it when we were playing. So the colors were a bit more muted than they are in some other games, and it I think came across as maybe a more somber tone in that regards. The story that we're introduced to, nothing groundbreaking in terms of that. It's just a typical kind of fantasy genre type thing, and the cliche anime main character with amnesia type thing, trying to learn about their past. So those were the initial reactions as we were introduced into the world. But Steve, what maybe stood out to you upon loading in and those first 5-10 minutes in the game?
A lot of what you already said, I don't necessarily repeat, but combat was very strong. It was a big selling point of the game. Again, the character designs seemed a little flat. Lots of black and whites in it. There were bright spots. You had the unfortunately I'm going to butcher character names, but you had the one character who was wearing all blue. You had the other red-haired girl. So there were spots of color, but for the most part, everyone was wearing black and white. I would also say that, just for context, from my experience, I had just finished playing through the entirety of Honkai Story on the Brohoyo account in order to try and get to finish Pinacone. This way we could get the light cone for Robin for that account. There is an episode, a highlight that I dropped of me complaining about Pinnacone's story that will loop back here in a little bit. But just so everyone knows, part of the reason why I was so negative going in is that I just beelined through another gotcha story, and I wasn't necessarily in the mood for some of the tropes and shenanigans that I started to run into very early in that play session and in my experience from there. If I come off a little bit negative, I think part of it was I wasn't going in necessarily giving Wuthering Waves the benefit of the doubt. I was had my BS meter full, and certain things were pushing me over the edge. I don't think it was a bad game. Again, combat was a real strength of it, but a lot of the other aspects of the game I felt weren't really playing to its own strengths. A lot of it, very, this is going to come up a lot. It feels like a Genshin clone, and in many cases, it felt like they didn't so much take inspiration as they stole Genshin's homework and then didn't even really bother to change much. But that was my very much so my first impression. I have since altered that opinion, but I guess I'll kick it back over to you, Dave. As we sit here now, what do you think of Wuthering Waves?
So sitting here now obviously there was something to talk about with the Firestorm online because obviously you have the fandoms of Genshin Impact and you have those that have been hyping up and building up Wuthering Waves fairly or unfairly, trying to say that it's going to be a Genshin killer, or others were maybe being a bit more realistic and saying, oh yeah, these two games are going to be able to exist and have a carved out space in the gacha ecosphere, as it were. In terms of Wuthering Waves, sitting here today and really having sat back and looked at the launch of the game and trying to be as objective as possible about it. We experienced it on the PC client. And for the PC client, I would say the game itself was running pretty smooth. I didn't really notice too many hiccups or stutters. There were a couple here. I would attribute that more to just the demand of the servers more than anything. But it is worth noting that if you were trying to play this game on a phone, which kudos to you for playing an action RPG on the phone, that is not something I could do or be anywhere remotely good at. But if you were trying to play it on the phone, there were massive performance issues, even on newer phones. We were seeing some pretty bad stuttering, some pretty bad frames, and definitely some kind of broken, almost like broken images type things. Like it got pretty bad. And Kuro, to their credit, they're going to work on getting those things emergency hot fixed. And then compensation was given out. I think there was maybe a standard 10 pull, 10 wishes that were given out. There was maybe some premium currency. And then I believe there's also a 5-star selector that was given out, which was appreciative. The intro to get to pull it, for those of you that are interested in the re-rolling aspect of it, it probably takes about 40 minutes to unlock the pulling aspect. And I would probably argue that re-rolling isn't worth it in this particular game, just for how long it takes to get there. And if you're going to be playing it long term, you're ultimately going to gather everything anyway. The selector was nice, especially I know for both of us, because on the beginner banner we both ended up getting Ling Yang, or the dragon dancing boy, essentially, which his play style and aesthetic wasn't really for me, and I know that was considered fourth or fifth on your desired list. And so I mention all these things because these all go into where I sit with Wuthering Waves. And the other thing that kind of came up this week too, that was a big thing for me, because there's been a lot of memes and jokes like, oh, Genshin would never, in terms of giving out a 5-star selector, or Genshin would never do this. And then there was an article this week talking about how there are plans to nerf characters in Wuthering Waves. And I sent that to you, Steve,
Mm-hmm.
when I saw it, and that was my joke of like, Genshin would never nerf characters type thing. They may buff them up, but they would never nerf characters. And I want to see how that gets handled if that comes through and they do actually nerf characters, because I read this after I picked Calcharo from the selector because I needed a good DPS, and then I find out he's actually going to be nerfed as well as a few other characters. So I would say that it was a rocky start to the game. It wasn't the smoothest of launches, both from a technical aspect and in terms of how they handled some of those things, especially if you're going to announce nerfs a week after the game's out, not even. And I know this is long-winded. I want to get it back to you to see where you stand right now. But again, I thought it was important to bring in all of these things because even though it's its own standalone thing, ultimately it's going to be compared to its closest quote unquote competitors. And so I would say in terms of the launch, it was an okay launch. A lot of performance issues that will probably get ironed out. And it's a game for me that I'm not going to be avidly, I think, playing it like every type of day, like I do Genshin or Star Rail, to max out the battle pass and get stories done and build up my roster. I think it'll be one of those ones that if there's a character that looks interesting that I want to try out or try and pull for, I'll log in, or if they have a cool looking event. But the story, there weren't really any characters that were necessarily super gripping to me. So it's going to be on my computer because I have a lot of desktop space and I can fit it. But if I was hard pressed to choose, oh, you can only have X number of games on your computer, this one probably would not make the cut. But what about you, Steve?
So for me, I'm still having technical issues with the game. I'm still getting slow performance, bad performance on the desktop. Now, in part, I think that's. I don't think that's a system issue because I've got a fairly new system. It can play and run most games at high or better quality, max quality. So the only thing I can come up with is it must be a connection issue or something on that end because I do live not necessarily in the heart of urban America, as it were. There's a bit of a connection problem there, maybe, but yeah, I'm still having technical issues. I have softened somewhat on the game. I do think that my initial negative outlook on it was perhaps a little bit too harsh. I remember when we finished up the recording, I was very much, when we were talking about it, David, I came in and said, this is probably going to be the most clickbaity title, and I might still hold to that, but this will be the most clickbaity title that we'll probably ever have, just because, or at least yet, just because I'm really wasn't digging the game. I have played it since. I've tried to do it daily. I've had zero interest in moving the story forward. I am still getting the feeling that given how strong the combat is, the open world side of it doesn't play to the game's strength. It actually hurts it. That it would do much better as a more level based game, something again similar to Honkai or closer in nature to DMC, Devil May Cry, where you have a smaller, more focused level that you move from arena to arena, you engage in the combat, and the fight set pieces are a little bit more structured than what you get in the open world. I will also say, I have to be 100% blunt and honest, the amount of freebies that they have given away has warmed me to the game a little, but as a consequence of that, I'm also I don't see how there would be any incentive to pay in the game at the moment. Unless you just really want this first character, I don't see any incentive to pay. As far as rerolling goes, you get 3 free characters, 2 of which you get to choose. So you get whatever you roll on the first starter banner, and then you get to pick 2 others. Unless you're just trying to go for the A number one perfect account, there's very little reason to reroll after all of the free giveaways and so on and so forth have come in. But yeah, I've warmed on it. I'm not as negative as I was, but it's very much so sitting below Nikke on my play order. I tend to hit Nikke first before I log into Wuthering Waves. But wrapping that up, let's go into a quick point by point kind of discussion. So, Dave, story. What did you think of the story or any story elements that you managed to glean from the game?
The story, like I mentioned, to me was very gotcha game trope, main character with amnesia type thing. So it wasn't anything revolutionary in that regards. Something with the story that doesn't help it either, and I want to get your thoughts on this, was the voice acting. I thought the voice acting, and I don't know if this is. I don't necessarily attribute this to the voice actors themselves because I think part of this too is also like the voice directors and like telling them to do things a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is just the direction that they were given. But a lot of the voice acting, in my opinion, just felt very flat. Didn't necessarily put emphasis or excitement in areas of dialogue that I felt would be exciting. When you're introduced to one of the bad, like what we are to view as the baddie group right now, you're introduced to, oh, I forget both of their names.
Scar, and I don't remember what the young lady was.
Yeah, so the young lady, you're introduced to her, and in her introductory scene, she's snuck up on you, you've pinned her to the ground, you have a blade to the neck type thing, and you're interrogating each other. And her explanation, just the way she delivers it, just felt very flat for me. And also there was one interesting paragraph where we know how in Honkai Star Rail, and in Honkai Star Rail, and in Genshin now too, in dialogue, sometimes there will be a word and then there will be an explanation for what that word is on top of that word,
Hmm.
right? That happens in Wuthering Waves as well, but the voice actor actually read that print that's above and smushed it and rushed it together. Whereas in Genshin or in Star Rail, they don't say the explanation above the word; they just say what the word is. This voice actress, she said the word and then the stuff above it, and it just felt very crammed together, and I just it made me raise an eyebrow. From a story perspective, the voice acting detracted for it a little bit for me. And I think the other thing too is, and I guess this is maybe why I'm more gripped in Star Rails and Genshin Story, is there is a skip button in Wuthering Waves,
Hmm.
and I utilized that a few times because I was like wanting to try out the game. So I did skip over some of the story in the first couple acts that were given. So maybe Genshin, even though we complain there's no skip button, it's drawing us to the game and the story because it's forcing us to sit there and do it. Maybe some logic behind not having the skip button. But on the topic of skip buttons, you didn't always have a skip button in Wuthering Waves. Some dialogue options will have it, and some don't. So some dialogue and lore dump you have to sit through, and others you don't. So that was inconsistent and weird. But maybe they're gonna patch that and fix that so there's always a skip button. That's my understanding, but I haven't actually seen it yet, so I don't know. So that's the initial thoughts on the story. I do have a couple characters that we've been introduced to or that I've gotten in the account that I'm more interested in because I have them in the account. But as for right now, yeah, they're just throwing a bunch of things at us, and then there's this really cool dragon that's the Sentinel. And it's like, okay, what's his deal? But what about you, Steve? Anything from the story standing out to you, or any characters in particular that are standing out from the story?
Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts regarding the story.
Yeah, especially
So,
because you came right off the Pentecost story as
yeah.
well. So you were, even if you didn't necessarily want to, subconsciously you were going to probably be comparing them at least a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. One of the things that I believe was in the Let's Play was choosing the name Rover for the main character was perhaps not the best decision on behalf of the designers, on the writers. I understand why. I get it. I really do think that part of it was they were looking for a term that wasn't traveler or adventurer or wanderer or something like that. They wanted something fairly unique. And so they went, okay, rove is to rove around, means to wander. So if you are a rover, like a land rover, let's say, then you wander, you go around. But what it lacked was the American context of rover also being used as a fairly generic dog's name. So whenever they would refer to Rover, it would just start cracking me up on because they're basically calling the main character a dog. That's not a universal issue. Heck, at this point, we might be one of the few people in this youngerish generation who get that. I don't think Rover is nearly as common of a dog name and probably isn't coming up as much, but it still was giving me a chuckle. I also have to say that there were a couple of edits that were very rough, and again, I don't believe that what I'm about to discuss was in the Let's Play section. But later on, there's a character who is captured and interrogated, and they just cut to a black screen saying the character was taken away to jail, and it had me cackling, and you can attest to that, Dave. It cracked me up. I was cackling laughing because it was just such a cheap cut. It was one where it would have been a nothing burger to have the character dragged away. That's a fairly standard animation, fairly standard setup for a character, but they instead just cut to black and go, and they were taken away to prison. Okay, that would have been nice to see that. It was a bit abrupt, which I guess loops back around to one of my problems with the storytelling. And I brought this up in, again, the video that I put up about the rant about Pinacone, is I've really, especially because of the Pinacone story, I've really hit my limit when it comes to video game dialogue because they just don't do a great job of making the dialogue itself interesting from a visual standpoint. It's typically two characters in shot reverse shot talking to each other and then you picking dialogue options. There's usually not much going on. And the picking dialogue options is sometimes not even part of it, especially if it's a longer cutscene or you have other characters talking. And it's just boring. It's boring to look at. It's something that, from a TV, movie, etc. point of view, we've moved well beyond. I guarantee if you look at most television shows, they don't do their dialogue as shot reverse shot over the shoulder, looking at each other at character, and just hold on that for 5 minutes. You have characters doing something. They have blocking where they're moving around. They'll engage with their own setting, and I understand from a design and cost point of view that when you're filming a television show live, human actors do those things is functionally free because you've already paid for the set, you've already paid for the actors' time. So having them engage in more dynamic activities while they're talking is a non-issue. Whereas in a video game, you have to actually animate all of those actions, all of those movements. So just having two characters stand there and talk is cheaper. But at the same time, I really want video games in general to move on from this. I really want them to start improving it. It's like I said, I hit my boiling point with Pinacone where it's 40 minutes of two characters standing there talking to each other in shot reverse shot format. I've had all I can stand. I can't stand no more. I hit my Popeye moment. Going forward, I'm going to be far more critical of all games when I see it because after having to sit through it, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. That being said, I do think that the skip button, or the lack of the skip button, ruined the story to a certain degree because as soon as I got the option to, I did just start skipping once we stopped recording and so forth. That skip button became my friend, and at this point, I have no idea what's going on in the story. I could not care less. I'm completely unengaged with it. Yeah, sorry for that short rant there, but that's my thoughts on Wuthering Waves story, which I guess we can then segue into gameplay. What sort of design, player experience, etc. did you have, Dave?
Yeah, so with gameplay, so like I mentioned previously, the combat was definitely a stronger point for Wuthering Waves in terms of the character abilities and being very flashy and like I said, working in perfect dodges and counterattacks and the timing on those, and then building up your typical energy to use your ultimate or building up other energy to then combo in with like your character's outro skill with the next character's intro skill and stuff like that. So the combat is very good. As far as the mechanics, so the equivalent to artifacts are going to be the echoes, and these echoes basically randomly drop from creatures in the overworld, and they essentially are the creatures in the overworld, as it were. So if you kill this bear, it has a chance of turning into an echo you can absorb, and then that echo can be attached to a character as if it's a piece of equipment, which will give your substats and your set bonuses and whatever have you, and then you can have one of those echoes be your Q ability or just another ability, and each not Pokemon has a different ability based off of whenever you call them out. For instance, there's one where you'll turn into a golem and do a charge attack. There's another one where you'll turn into a turtle and do a dance that heals you and then maybe do a spike shell attack. Another one will be like a plant that'll shoot like a laser beam at something like that. And so that's just like an additional skill to help add some customization, as it were, to your character abilities, which is an interesting concept. My gripe with the ecosystem is you never know when one's going to drop. You can't guarantee an echo to drop like you could in an artifact dungeon, where you're guaranteed. You don't necessarily know if it's going to be a purple artifact or an orange artifact. You're at least going to get an artifact. I could go kill monsters, and there's no guarantee I'm going to get an artifact or get an echo, which is a little bit annoying. And then, of course, you still have the same typical substat RNG that has come to be associated with a lot of these types of equipment systems. So you have your 8, 9, 10 different stats it could roll into, and only 4 of them are useless, or only 4 of them are maybe useful. So they didn't really do anything, to renovate that system and make it interesting. And then again, I think the farming aspect made it worse because you can't guarantee a drop. And even if you could guarantee a drop, they literally can range anywhere from the typical rainbow of rarity in RPGs being green, blue, purple, orange, right? So
Mhm.
your commons, uncommons, rares, legendaries. Like you can't guarantee necessarily a legendary drop from the overworld type thing. At least that I've seen. If I'm wrong or if they change that, please let me know down below because I would like some help with that.
I
And then
think
another thing I'm
it's tied to world level. I
and
think.
potentially that might be it, but to that point, we're not at a higher world level yet, so I'm not getting too many to even drop at all. So that maybe speaks to the rarity, but the frequency of the drops. I don't know if it speaks to the frequency of the drop. Another thing I have an issue with, a small issue with, and I don't know if this is something that Genshin did. My memory that they may have been at fault, maybe guilty of this as well, and that's in terms of like, to level up weapons or to level up characters. Getting to World 2, I couldn't ascend my characters beyond level 20 until I advanced the world to World 2, and then I could get them to 40 or whatever. But then materials that I would need to get them to 40, I couldn't farm in World 1. I had to be in World 2. That's already upped the character or the enemy difficulty, excuse me. So I'd like to see maybe it doesn't have to be as efficient, right? It could be a less efficient way, but I'd still like to be able to pre-farm those materials that you need to get to say level 60. I'd like to be able to farm those in the level 40 worlds. Again, even if it's a less efficient way than if you were to be in the level 60 world, if that makes sense. And I can't remember if Genshin did that in
So
any
I can
or not.
answer that question if you would like.
Yeah.
So the way that Genshin and at least Honkai handle it is there are situations where you will not be able to get the materials that you need in order to ascend until you already have hit the necessary world level. An example of that would be things like certain world bosses, certain boss mats, and so on and so forth, that you just
Mhm.
won't be able to unlock that until you're a higher level. However, that tends to be at a low level and more story gated. Things like talent materials, ascension materials, etc., that are not boss drops, you can typically get them in less efficient forms. Just as a peek behind the curtain, that's part of the reason why I jumped in here. As we show ongoing gameplay behind us, eagle eyed viewers will notice that I do not raise the world level in the Brohoyo account above, I think, world level 5, primarily because I was trying to beeline the story and I knew that raise the world level, everything would jump up in difficulty and I'd have to stop to grind in order to get all the characters caught up, in order to then
Mm.
be able to continue with the content. So I actually played through at a lower world level in order to, or a lower equilibrium level in order to be able to finish the story in a reasonable time period and not have to lose a weekend grinding out mats in order to level up my characters to then be able to continue with the story. I just went, screw it, it's not worth it. I know I'm getting lesser rewards. I understand that every time I open a chest, that's an opportunity cost that happened. I don't care. I was just trying to get to the end of it.
And
Jumping ahead
that's
of
good
that.
clarification. Yes. No, thank you for that. And like I said, it's something that I preface said Genshin may have been guilty of this, and it sounds like that they are to a little bit of an extent. So yeah, so that would be a gripe for both. But again, we're just talking about Wuthering Waves because that's what just launched. And then as far as the overworld exploration stuff, it is a little bit easier. It's nice not having to worry about stamina when you're just running and only having to worry about it when you're swimming or when you're running up a wall, which again is much faster than climbing up a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the overworld challenges just maybe feel a little bit clunkier in terms of race from point A to point B without touching the ground, but you don't necessarily have a path laid out for you or directional arrows on where to go. You just have to hope that your eye catches like where the little glowing orbs are, or maybe some of the speed challenges and racing around aren't as intuitive as maybe you would like them to be. And then another thing too with exploration is if you're going to have world levels, I think there's a moment in our Let's Play where I was just running around exploring, just trying to unlock the fast travel points and just exploring what I can explore. I'm like, oh hey, what's the worst that could happen? And then I ran into some level 60 or 70 mobs, and I'm sitting there level 20, and I'm on world 1, and yeah, those are eventually going to become trivial enemies to beat once I'm high enough level. But if you have a world difficulty level, you're not expecting to run into level 60 or 70 things just willy-nilly out of the blue. Pick a lane and go with it. Either have zones that have different levels or have a world that has different levels. Don't try and combine both because then that blocks me out from getting to that area or exploring that area as thoroughly as maybe I would like to. But again, I think going back to the combat, which is what you're going to spend a majority of the time doing, especially as we get into the farming stages and the grinding out for materials. I think that's a strong point for the game itself. I think that and the intricacies and like the perfect dodges and stuff is something that's going to keep people around to try and perfect that and get better and improve at it. And then also depending on what mechanics they introduce with characters that are going to be coming out down the road. But Stevie, I'll throw it back to you. Any complaints that you have with the game or praises that you have in terms of the gameplay aspects?
Yeah, again, combat great. I know that we keep on beating that drum, but that very much so is the selling point of the game. I agree with you about most of the world activities that they either feel clunky or I would even say a lot of them are basic to the point of appealing. There's really just not a lot driving me to do them. Not that Genshin is, again, not guilty of this. They have a number of overworld puzzles and events and so on and so forth that are just only interesting because I need to do them in order to get the treasure chest so that I can make the fountain go up or make the tree go up or whatever. Get those seals. Other than that, meh, I'd probably not even bother with them most of the time. Yeah, I really do feel that playing the game, they would have been better off not going the open world route. I would also say that from the mechanics point of view, I really agree with you to a certain amount that the leveling system and the world level system and so on and so forth just don't appeal. They're not systems that I necessarily enjoy in Genshin, and having to play through them again here is not one that I'm chomping at the bit to go through a second or third time, as it were. We'll see when ZZZ comes out if that same system is in place and what goes on there, because I'm going to be honest, going through it a fourth time at this point, fifth time at this point, is rather unappealing. And I understand that there needs to be progression. We did an entire episode on progression, but I really do feel that the way that it's set up is not intuitive. It's not something that I'm really enjoying. I would also say that the fact that you can't teleport directly to a boss,
Yeah, I
or
was
that
just
they
about to
don't,
say that. Yeah.
yeah, that they don't have teleporters that are in many cases just outside. There are some cases where you can teleport to like right next to one and you'll be okay, but there are some that are off in the middle of nowhere. There's no teleporter near it, and you're just left going like, okay, I guess if I want to grind this boss, it's going to be a 2 minute run in order to get over. The fight lasts maybe 5 minutes, maybe less, depending on level and so on and so forth. And then I've got to leave, waste 5 minutes, and then I get to come back, but I have to. There's then a 2 minute delay on teleporting back and getting there. So that's an issue. I would also say the fact that teleporters don't heal is mildly annoying, that you have to go to the beacon in order to heal yourself instead of having both the little teleporters and the beacons heal you. It is a minor frustration. I would also say that some of the boss arenas are frustrating. One of the issues that I had the first and second day was I was trying to fight a one of the bosses in order to get the mats and clear the achievement and so on and so forth. And I would get the boss down to maybe a third of his health, and he would reset. And I'd be sitting there going, like, great, I'm now at half health on all my characters, or I might have a character downed, and I could finish the fight. I could win the fight, but that's dependent on the character not, or the boss not rubber banding and then resetting itself to full health and immediately dropping me back in at my current resource level. That was frustrating. I haven't run into that issue as much. Now that we're a little bit further in, they might have fixed that and resolved some of those arena issues to where the bosses aren't quite as reset happy. They're not quite as bound to their arena, so you have a little bit of wiggle room. But as long as I am within the area of the arena, I don't feel like the boss should reset, even if I am successfully kiting the boss and not taking any damage or allowing it to hit me. I
So
feel like that's good play.
you mentioned the moss resetting, so I haven't had that, but I've had the opposite in that the battle has waged beyond kind of what I would feel the arena would be. So much to the point that the arena is not isolated. I've been fighting a boss for the ascension materials, and then three random mobs that were at camps nearby aggro. And so now instead of fighting this fast moving, flying around boss and trying to focus on when I can counterattack him and dodging the ranged attacks when he's blinking everywhere, now I have these three other level 46 mobs when I'm level 40 trying to attack me and get at me. And they don't, honorably wait their turn for a one-on-one duel.
Hmm.
They're all just coming at me. And that is an issue that I've not really experienced in any other game before, where if you're farming a boss, just random world mobs that are like little creeps come in. That's something that I think could afford to be fixed, or afford to put like an invisible wall or barrier so that the boss doesn't go outside it, and therefore the player doesn't go outside it to aggro these other mobs.
Yeah, again, that kind of just I've had that happen to me as well. But that kind of goes back to my issue that I feel like as an open world game, it just doesn't. The combat system and the open world systems don't play well together. That you want to be playing in open arenas without a lot of difficult geometry. You want to play it in the MOC or in the Abyss type arenas. You don't necessarily want big logs sitting in the middle of the battlefield that your characters get caught up on, or you're trying to dodge and then you move an inch and then you're hitting a rock and great, I'm stuck here, or what have you. That it really does feel that it wants to be played in empty arenas where that cut and thrust of the combat can really play out well, and doing that in the open world just doesn't add anything to it. But maybe I'm just being a doomer on it. Maybe I'm being overly critical, and that open world aspect is more interesting. There's something going on that I'm not seeing. If there was more terrain obstacles or so forth that you could interact with as part of combat, maybe that would help it. I've also had an issue where I knocked a low level mob off of a cliff and they fell, and basically the only thing I could do is wait for it to rubber band and teleport back up to the top and reset itself instead of it dying. I knocked it off the cliff. It fell 50 feet. Maybe it should take fall damage and die. If I had fallen from that height, I would have died, but apparently the mobs, it doesn't work that way, and so that can be a little bit frustrating. Yeah, again, the movement in the open world is great. The ability to run up the walls, the hook shot that you get, your grappling hook, works really well in order to get an extra boost, and using it in combat is fun, and so on and so forth. It's just, again, I don't necessarily feel that the pieces were put together well. It seems like you really had a combat team and then an open world team, and the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing, and they weren't really working together to make something that flows together in the same way that, as just a sort of general example, in Genshin, you can set the grass on fire, and that creates pyro. If you're standing in water, hydro is going to get applied. If you're standing in water and you use electro, hey, you've just electrified the water, electrocuted. If you're standing in water and somebody uses cryo, you get frozen. Stuff like that. There's interactions with the world that make combat and exploration merge. And there's not that same effect in Wuthering Waves, or at least I'm not seeing it.
Also,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot more little collectibles as well, like to pick up on the ground. I know there's a lot of things like to pick up with Genshin as well, but
Mhm.
I feel like there's more and they're not as well highlighted until you're on top of them in Wuthering Waves. Because I do appreciate that it's the drive-by looting. And you just press F and boom, you pick them up,
Mhm.
and that's great. But it does feel like there's a lot more to pick up. But I did want to get from you, Steve, as far as I think we touched on a little bit in regards to characters, but as of right now, and then maybe we move to closing thoughts unless you have some other things you want to touch. But I want to talk about, do you have a favorite character, a character that appeals to you, whatever reason, their looks, their role they played in the story, their combat, what it looks like? Is there a character that stands out to you?
Not Sephiroth. I think Chalco is the character's
Oh,
name.
Calcharo.
Calcharo. Yeah, not
Yes.
Sephiroth is the only way I can think of him. He's hands down my favorite character, but that's just because I'm a Final Fantasy VII mark, and they've given me not Sephiroth, so I'm 100% game for that. Get me the Masamune, give me a sword longer than he is, a katana longer than he is, and play. It's not Deus Iri. What is the name of that song? The Safer Sephiroth song, his theme,
Mhm.
and I can go to town. He's great. I love him as a character. He's fun. He has zero character, which is great because so does Sephiroth. Sephiroth has zero character as well. Fight me. But yeah, just he's hands down my favorite. Jing Lang, Ying Jang. I can't remember the little tiger guy that I ended up pulling early is just awful, absolutely awful. I don't want to be mean to any voice actors. I don't think that it's the voice actor's fault. I think it was a direction or something issue, but the nasally pretend young boy voice is just it's rough, it's bad, and he wouldn't shut up. He just would not shut up. So
It didn't
yeah,
help that he was not only the character that we both first got from the beginner banner, but he's literally, I think, the first like character side story quest that you could do. So
mm-hmm.
we're inundated with him, and then you get a trial with him as well. And it's like I don't need the trial and his story quest. I pulled him. Whereas if we had gotten somebody else, it maybe wouldn't have graded on us as much. Probably still would have graded on you, but
Yeah.
not probably as much. Yeah, that's fair. So for me, I I really like Baiji. She's
Mm-hmm.
the healer scientist lady that we're introduced to. I just when because you get her for free at some point in the story, I believe. But I pulled her early, and then there you do get a trial with her as part of a story quest early on. And I just thought it was really cool that she was attacking with this summoned beast, and it was like the arranged thing. And the fact that she's a healer is I'm always like a support person in any type of multiplayer game or MMO type. So I always tend to track towards the healer support types. When I first saw her and her attack animations and ultimate, and she's not using this the stereotypical sword type weapon, I thought that was really cool. I think when I was introduced to Encore in the story, I messaged you. I was like, I think I found your Klee character because she was adorable as well. But to go to the other end of the spectrum, a character that I'm not really doing it. I not to pile on to the boy, but yeah, Ling Yang or whatever his name is. Yeah, just not really for me. His combat also felt a little awkward too because you had playing from the ground, but then also you had the aerial combat to play around with and those aerial combos. It just felt a little awkward and weird to be sustaining a fight while hovering in mid-air. But the hovering in mid-air is different than say how the Wanderer character hovers in mid-air in Genshin and such. But yeah, but for standing out for me, I really liked Baiji, and then I'm on court just from a pure adorableness character perspective. Cracked me up when we were introduced to her and I think Alt is his name or Alto maybe, but their little tag team dialogue back and forth did crack me up. Um, but that's all I got for this as far as the Wuthering Waves stuff. Were there any other topics that you wanted to hit on, or did you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think we covered most of it, including some of the out of game issues and concerns you brought up earlier. So yeah, I think that's a good summary of what we think of Wuthering Waves.
Yeah, so I think, like you said, if
Oh,
we had to oh, go
actually,
ahead.
sorry, I do have one quick question I want to get from you.
Yeah.
So, Dave, do you think Wuthering Waves has legs? What do you think the future of the game is looking like, both in subscriber or not subscriber, but user count and the viability of the game going forward? And then we can call it.
Yeah, so I think for Wuthering Waves and the path forward, I think there's been a good response from Kuro as far as trying to fix and optimize a lot of the technical issues they were having. So it's not going to fail because of something like that. I think what will ultimately happen, and I think we voiced these expectations even from the get-go, as far as realistic expectations for the game, it was never going to be, and it's not going to be the Genshin killer like that some people were trying to hype it up as. It was never going to be that, but it's still going to be a solid game, much like Punishing Gray Raven was a solid game. It has a very passionate fan base. It's a smaller but passionate fan base for Punishing Gray Raven. I think you'll have that with Wuthering Waves as well, in that it will be smaller, relatively speaking, to Genshin, but they will be very passionate fan base as far as guides and min-maxing and combat stuff because there is that extra layer, excuse me, in combat. I would be interested to see its numbers compared to something that I think it more realistically can beat out would be Tower of Fantasy. Because Tower of Fantasy similarly also had a rough launch. Now it was more of a true MMO as opposed to what Genshin and Wuthering Waves are, but I think it will be fine and it will probably run for a couple of years. And then again, I don't know what line Kuro draws as far as being profitable to keep going because that number in terms of what we see on the Sensor Tower revenue reports, some developers and publishers they'll see $500,000 and think no, that's not good enough. We're shutting it down, and others will be like, yeah, we'll keep running it. That's fine. That keeps the servers up. It's a little bit of profit, and we'll keep it running. Sure. So I don't know where Kuro's goal is with that and what their KPIs are to determine success, but I think it'll probably run for a couple of years and then be fine. How about you, Steve?
Very similar. I do think that what we're going to see is a fairly steep drop off in daily user count, primarily just because the combat is as I don't want to say punishing, but it's so much of a focus that I don't know if a general gacha user base is going to be interested in the difficulty, the hassle of having to play through dailies in this combat system. I already get frustrated with Genshin, and Genshin is hardly a complex game when it comes to that. The amount of dedication it's going to take daily for players to log in and burn all their I'm just going to call it resin, burn all their resin and complete their dailies and so forth is enough that I don't see the more casual Genshin player base sticking around. But I've been wrong before, and I could be wrong again. I think it will do fine. I think it will get a strong, passionate player base. I just don't have high expectations of it, let's say 2 years out, 3 years out. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
curious to see where it goes. I don't think it's DOA. I just think that it's definitely, to draw a metaphor, there's a lot of people out there who keep on begging for that PvP MMO, and then there's never been a PvP MMO that's really ever taken off in any extreme degree, just because it seems like the market for that is small enough that you're just never going to get the AAA version of it that's able to work. And I think we're in a similar situation here with Wuthering Waves, that the combat is good, but I don't think that most gacha players play gachas for the combat, if I'm being blunt.
Okay. Yeah, and that's like I said, I think that's fair, and that kind of will wrap up the discussion on Wuthering Waves. For me, yeah, it's just the last final thought. Like I said, it's going to stay on the computer. I don't know if it'll be on the daily rotation. Maybe it'll be on a weekly, hey, check in periodically, or if they have events or something like that. But it'll be a quality game to stand alone on itself. So moving from Wuthering Waves, we do want to jump in and discuss with Honkai Star Rail. So we had Boot Hill launch this week, the Boot Hill banner drop. So let's get into that next. So looking at Honkai Star Rail this week, Boot Hill banner dropping, and a couple of new events, but we'll go ahead and start with the character breakdown. And for that, Steve, I'm going to throw it to you to discuss Boot Hill's kit and what are his mechanics.
Okay. Boot Hill is a physical hunt character. He's a break DPS, which is somewhat of a new archetype for the game. As everyone knows, enemy characters have toughness bars above them in Honkai Star Rail, where if you deal the same type of physical damage as the enemy has weaknesses, you wear down the toughness bar, and then when you deplete it, the enemy breaks, quote unquote, takes damage, takes an effect for it depending on the type of element that breaks them, and they then become a little bit more vulnerable. They basically take 10% more damage, roughly. So Boot Hill is built around the idea of depleting that toughness bar, putting enemies into that break form, and then through break damage, dealing just a lot of one-shot damage up front. His damage curve is very spiky. And if he can break an enemy, he's going to do a whole lot of damage. try not to swear there. He's going to do a whole lot of damage. And when he's not breaking enemies, he's going to be very low damage. He's not going to have a very high output in that regard. The way that he manages to break enemies is his skill. What it'll do is it'll put him and whatever opponent he chooses, a single opponent he chooses, into a standoff stance where the enemy is taunted directly to him and he gains bonuses when attacking that enemy, so they kind of want to duel each other basically. And that stance will stay until he either breaks the enemy's toughness or kills the enemy. So if the enemy is already toughness broken, then he can use it on a toughness broken enemy, and when he kills them, then he benefits from a number of different buffs. So the way that you're gonna, or I don't want to go too deep into build right now, but that is his skill. His basic becomes an enhanced basic after he uses his skill. He can use his skill, he immediately advances forward 100%, and can use an enhanced basic that will be his main source of damage. His ult is a single target ult that will apply physical weakness. So if they are already not physical weak, he can make them physical weak, which will then allow his kit to actually function against enemies that aren't physically weak. And it deals some damage as well and some break effect as well. So you're going to want to save his ult for either enemies that are not physical weakness, who do not have a physical weakness, this way you can apply that to them, or if you're just looking to push something over the edge and break them, you would want to use it then. The upshot of all of this is that, again, his damage chart is a very large spike. He can one-shot a number of bosses if he manages to actually break them. So you want to... his focus is really on weakness breaking enemies, or toughness breaking enemies, and doing a lot of damage through that. With all that said, I guess I'll pass it back over to you, Dave, to go over some build and team info.
Some pretty interesting mechanics with Boot Hill, like you mentioned, applying the physical weakness with his skill and his ultimate. And so we have a little bit of a unique situation with him, because usually when you get characters like this, you build a set that is the same as the element they are. And in terms of like his best set for what we have available to us at the moment, it's actually going to be the Quantum set, the Genius of the Brilliant Stars, just for the defense shred of that four-piece set that it applies. That's been what's showing the best numbers from the reporting and stuff that I've seen. And then with the second set being the Thief of the Shooting Meteor, which is the break effect set, pretty much one of the basic sets there that you have. So those two sets are going to be number 1 and 2 in terms of the numbers output. We're going with their 4-piece set.
Right.
Those.
But real quick, what's the statistical difference between those two, though?
Very minimal. It is very minimal. It's maybe a 2% difference, if that, from what I'm seeing there. And then you can, if you need some more freedom in terms of some of your substats or some of your main stats, if you are going Thief of the Shooting Meteor, if you do a 2-2 split instead of going with the 4-piece set, you could go 2 Thief of the Shooting Meteor and 2 of the Watchmaker set, or you could do 2 Thief of the Shooting Meteor and then Messenger Traversing Hackerspace for a little bit of that speed bonus as well, if you're not necessarily hitting some of the speed thresholds that you want. There's a very small numbers drop if you utilize that third option there with the Messenger Traversing Hackerspace, but even smaller than the difference between 4-piece Genius of the Brilliant Stars and 4-piece Thief of the Shooting Meteor. The drop from that to the Messenger of the Traversing Hackerspace is less than 1%. So again, these are all very similar. As if we're trying to talk min-maxing, you're really only talking between the top 3 options, a 3% difference in DPS from the set bonuses themselves and what those mean to his kit. Now, as far as the planetary sets, the best numbers show, or the best performance, I should say, shows when we use the Talia, the Kingdom of Bantry. And I'm sorry, one more quick note on the numbers for the Genius of the Brilliant Stars. That assumes that the enemy has a quantum weakness applied to it. So that is one caveat I forgot to throw in there. If the enemy is weak to quantum units, that is going to be the best output. If it does not have a quantum weakness to it, then your best set right now is going to be Thief of the Shooting Meteor. So that can make a little bit of a difference, but it's something I forgot to mention that I wanted to add in there. So again, quantum weak enemies use that quantum set for the Genius of the Brilliant Stars and that defense shred. If they do not have a quantum weakness, then you're going to want to throw in the Thief of the Shooting Meteor, and I will bring up in team comps kind of some things we can do to get around that. So those of you that are familiar with Silverwolf, you'll know what I'll be referencing. But anyway, back to the planetary sets really quickly. Again, I'm assuming you can break the 145 speed threshold. Talia Kingdom of Banditry is going to be your best set. And even if you can't break that 145 speed threshold, it's still going to be your top option there. Glomoth would be the second option for you, but the Glomoth option is a bit of a drop off. It's a drop off of about 7 to 8%, according to the data, in terms of damage. And this assumes with Glomoth that you have a speed break point of 160 for its peak performance. And if you can't hit 160 speed with Glomoth, the next cutoff would be 135. And there's about a 1 to 2% difference just between those speed thresholds if you're using Glomoth. But if you can't get to 160 and you're going to be looking at 135, then Glomoth. But if you can get to 145, Talia is going to be the way you want to go. A third option along the same lines with Glomoth would be the Rutilant Arena. But those are going to be the planetary sets you're going to want to work with. Now, in terms of sets, or in terms of stats, excuse me, on the pieces, feet, you're going to want speed. Speed boots, naturally, as with most damaging characters. And then the other specific thing you're going to want to look for is on your rope, you're going to want to look for break effect. When it comes to body, when it comes to planar sphere, you can really kind of go with anything that generally helps DPS. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything specific because he gets crit rate, crit damage kind of already from a lot of his stuff. So he's good to go there. The substats you're ultimately looking for are going to be speed until you can get the break point. And then beyond that, you're going to be looking for break effect. So as long as you can get those two items as substats, speed and break effect, the other two can be whatever to go from there. Now, getting into his light cones, obviously we have his signature light cone being his best for him because it's tailor-made for him. But what's interesting is for the free-to-play options, if you're not going for the light cone, his best is actually going to be a 3-star light cone, adversarial, assuming it's an S5. That'll be his next best. And then your best 4-cost option is going to be the River Flows in Spring. The number differentiation, again, his signature light cone to the adversarial, you're talking probably about a 1% damage difference between his signature and that 3-star. But the difference between the 3-star and then the River Flows in Spring is like 1 to 2% in terms of the damage output. Looking at synergies and team comps, so if you're kind of looking for an all-around team build, some of the best performing ones that the testing has showed has been Boot Hill, Bronya, Rune May, and Gallagher. If you do have a situation where you have a not quantum weakness character, you can sub out Bronya and put in Silverwolf, or you can sub out Rune May and put in Silverwolf. If you don't have Rune May, or Harmony Traveler is a good substitute as well, because the boost to break effects that he or she provides, depending on which Traveler you chose. But then Silverwolf is the way to work around to guarantee something is always weak to quantum, and therefore the quantum set would always be the best option on Boot Hill. So those are those teams there. And then yeah, so to recap the teams again, it's Boot Hill, Bronya, Rune May, Gallagher for just a good all-around team. And if you are using the quantum set and want to guarantee that, and maybe you don't have Rune May, you're going to be looking at Boot Hill, Silverwolf, Harmony Traveler, and then still Gallagher. So that's going to be Boot Hill and the Boot Hill build and kind of what you're looking for. So a bit easier with a lot more flexibility on those substats, which is pretty nice for you to go for. But now I want to jump into the events that we have that just came out. So we have The Legend of the Galactic Baseballer and Clocky's Dream Jolt Memoir. So Steve, what are we looking at with those two events?
I'm just really going to quickly cover Clocky's Dream Jolt Memoir. For that one, that's the ongoing event for Robin's Light Cone. It's the reason why I put myself through rushing through the story. It's fairly straightforward. You basically have to apply numbers to a grid and make certain, they call it emotional values. You either have to make the tension, comedy, or drama of the clip go up and down. I'm going to be honest, it's a rough event. I didn't enjoy it. There's not a lot to it. It's mostly just applying numbers. They give you a set of dice with numbers pre-assigned to them,
It's
and then
maths.
you,
That's why.
yeah,
That's why you're not enjoying it. It's maths. That's
I don't hate maths. It's just there's no actual gameplay to it. It's you stick numbers into a spreadsheet and then you're done. It's fine. Again, if you pulled for Robin, you're gonna have to complete it and get it done. This way you can get her free to play light cone, assuming you didn't pull for her signature, in which case I guess you're good to skip it. It is a limited time light cone, so you're probably going to want to complete it and get it to R5 in order to, or S5 in order to make sure that you have that on your account, because future Harmony characters might scale off of attack and benefit from it in the future, so it doesn't hurt to have it in your pocket. But other than that, I would say it's very meh. The Legend of the Galactic Baseballer is the one that I actually think most people will enjoy and have more fun with. One thing that's important to note about it is that it is not a time locked event. You can complete the entire event in one sitting right now. You could have actually completed it back on Wednesday when it first came out. So it is not time locked. You don't have to wait for anything. You can go in, knock it all out, play it through, and be good. It is basically a roguelike combat where you fight through 10 waves of enemies. And as you play through, if you've played Vampire Survivor, it has Vampire Survivor type weapon upgrades where you pick a weapon, you pick a passive, and each weapon has a passive that it's associated with that will then cause it to evolve. You can get to ridiculous numbers where these weapons are dealing out in the millions of damage. It's certainly a fun, wacky event. I can say, having played it on both the Brohoyo account, which is very much so a fresh level, max level account, and my personal account, the free versions of the characters that you get are perfectly fine. They play great. They're built for it. You can functionally play through the entire thing with a fresh account that has just completed Pinnaconey in order to get access to it. It is also a decent chance to try out certain characters. Boot Hill is included in it, so if you do want to try out Boot Hill, that is one option for how you can try him out outside of the already character
trial, yeah.
character that you have. So it's a chance to play with him with some teams and see what he can do. Admittedly, in a somewhat cracked game mode. It's not really designed to be balanced. It's made to be broken.
Testing that's done is not done in this game mode from number percentages.
Yeah. But
It's not the basis.
yeah, you can at least get a feel for him and see, how he plays and whether it'd be something you'd be interested in. I can definitely confirm from playing through that he is, as a hunt character, he is not for pure fiction. He is there to kill bosses, and he does that very well, but trying to wave clear with him would probably be a bit of a pain. But we're beyond Boot Hill. I think that's all for the Honkai and Genshin events. I don't think there's currently any ongoing Genshin events that I'm aware of that have come out, at least as of time of recording. So, do we have any general news from the larger gacha community?
Yeah. So in the general news section here, still keeping it within Hoyoverse, we did have Zen Zoneless Zero (ZZZ) officially announced their release date, their launch date for July 4th, which I believe is a Thursday for American listeners, obviously Independence Day. So won't be working on that day, and you hopefully have it off. And if you got nothing else to do, or you're in an area that doesn't allow fireworks, boom, try out ZZZ, give it a go. Which I know we'll be giving that a go. We'll probably be doing some type of maybe let's play based around it when it launches. But Zenless Zone Zero, again, July 4th, confirmed official launch date, and it may even be in the App Store for pre-download right now, which is pretty cool to see it this far out in advance. In other news, stepping away from Hoyoverse, I think I'd mentioned previously in an episode, or maybe I mentioned in the Let's Play, I've re-downloaded, reinstalled Snowbreak Containment Zone, giving that another go. I've heard they made some changes to the game. I wanted to see what direction that game was going and see if they maybe revamped any of the gameplay itself. They did just start a new event this week, so trying that out. But more importantly, the game near and dear to my heart, Nikkei Goddess of Victory. they have launched a new big event, continuing the side story from last year. It's a casino-based event, and you know what happens with casinos and waifus? You get bunny units and bunny themes. So we have two new units that are ultimately going to come out. One is out currently, which is Soda and her bunny outfit, bunny version rather, and then we are going to have Alice and her bunny version probably in about a week or so. But the new event, it's got a fully voiced side story, a whole like map that you can explore, find hidden things on, which is pretty good. They kind of went all out for this one, a lot of flash, but it's a casino, so it's to be expected, right? And another thing they did with this update, which was really cool, was they brought back the MOG game mode, which, if you're familiar with Vampire Survivor or any game of that type, it was Nikkei's version of that, which was a mini game they introduced back during their Red Hood anniversary event. They brought it back as a permanent feature since it was so popular. So if you like those types of games, you can download the gotcha game and then play this within the gotcha game, as it were. It's pretty decently well done. Really excited for that event and how it unfolds. Also, new battle pass, which in and of itself, there's I think two new skins that are coming out with that. Their battle passes I think are like $20 for that. It gives you about 20 pulls, some other resources, and then yeah, usually a skin if you complete it. But yeah, so Nikkei Goddess of Victory, check it out, and their new event for the casino. But that's going to essentially do it for us this week. We do want to thank you for joining us, and let us know down below what your thoughts were on Wuthering Waves launch, and if you intend to keep playing it or where you think the future for that game is headed. If you did enjoy this episode, be sure to leave a comment, follow, subscribe to the channel. You can email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions or suggestions for the show. We also have a link down in to our Discord for the description there, so you can join us over there. If you have for news, we have game nights going on, content notifications. I do want to let you guys know the podcast, we're going to be taking a short break here for a couple weeks on new episodes, but we do have other content planned during this brief hiatus, so we're going to maybe be doing some Let's Plays with some other, maybe some AAA games to play along with, follow along with, something like that we're thinking about doing. For the podcast, Season 3, we're going to begin on June 20th, when we're going to take a deep dive into leaks and their effects on gotcha games. But until next time, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.